Here's a question for you. Why does it feel like society is coming apart? Politically, culturally, morally, seemingly all at once. I mean, crime goes unpunished while speech is policed. Institutions really have lost all credibility at this point. Politics has become nothing more than moral theatre, and yet no one seems to be able to explain why this is happening or what would actually fix it. The root cause reveals the solution. And it's not primarily political or economic, although it certainly feels that way because those are the areas where we experience the primary symptoms, but instead it's moral and it's civilisational. Now, for most of history, societies understood that moral authority had to come from beyond human opinion. And today, the West has largely abandoned that framework while still trying to enforce moral outcomes. And the result, well, is chaos. Chaos below for us in the pleb class and control from above. Party politics, manifestos, debates, these all have their place. But we need to attempt to diagnose a deeper problem and explain why recovery won't come through outrage or activism or voting alone. Now, if you've ever felt that something is wrong but struggled to articulate it, I don't think you're crazy. Every civilization lives under a god. The only question is which one. We're living in a strange moment in the West right now. We're governed by people, a class who speak constantly about morality and fairness and equality and justice and safety, whilst refusing to explain where any of these ideas actually came from. We're told what must be said and what mustn't be said, who is dangerous, who must be corrected, but we're no longer told why any of this is actually binding. You know, this isn't a political problem. It goes far deeper, whether we want to admit it or not. Civilizations since time immemorial have understood something instinctively, that morality does not just emerge from nowhere. The ancient Greeks spoke of logos, right, a rational order beneath reality. The Romans believed in natural law. The Persians understood the world as a battleground between truth and falsehood or the lie. Ancient peoples everywhere sensed that justice had weight because it answered to something higher than kings. Even when they disagreed on the details, they agreed on the principle that moral order is discovered, it's not invented. And that law, therefore, is legitimate only if it aligns with something beyond the human whim. No civilization has ever survived by pretending that morality was just merely a social preference. Now, the West didn't invent morality. What it did, uniquely, was insist that moral authority itself was accountable, that kings were not gods, that rulers were under the law, that conscience mattered, that power was legitimate only if it was restrained. And this is why the West was able to produce such great things: human rights, individual rights, due process, the idea of inherent human dignity, the notion that the weak deserved protection. These ideas didn't emerge accidentally. They required a belief that human beings had worth before the state recognized it. That belief was not politically convenient, it was metaphysical. Hey there, sorry to stop the flow. I just wanted to take a second to ask you for a quick favour. If you wouldn't mind, could you subscribe to the channel? If you're interested, of course. I don't want to force you to do anything that you're not comfortable with. But I'm trying to gauge here whether or not the conversations that I want to have, or the topics that I want to discuss in the way I want to discuss them, is of any value at all. And the best way for me to gauge that is to see how many people are interested in subscribing to the channel. So you can do that. It's one of the few things the government have yet to tax, so it's free for you, free for me. Happy days for now anyway. So if you could do that, I'd be just massively appreciative of that. Back on with the chat. Let's go. Now, somewhere along the way, the West made a decision quietly. It decided that it wanted the moral conclusions, but it no longer wanted the metaphysical commitments underneath them. We wanted dignity without transcendence. We wanted rights without obligation. We wanted justice without judgment. We wanted meaning without submission. And for a while, it worked. But it was like spending inherited capital. And inherited capital eventually runs out. When a society abandons the idea that morality answers to something higher than itself, one thing always happens. Power moves in. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. Language becomes moralized, institutions become moral arbiters, dissent becomes heresy. And that is why modern politics feels less like governance and more like moral theatre, because we don't debate policies anymore. We accuse character. We don't persuade. We shame. We don't reason. We enforce. This is what moral language looks like when it has been detached from moral truth. People sense that something is deeply wrong right now, even if they can't articulate it. As I say, crime goes unpunished, but speech is policed. Borders dissolve, but opinions are monitored. Standards vanish, but enforcement intensifies. Compassion is preached, but accountability disappears. And yet control always increases. And this is the paradox of our age. Maximum moral confidence with minimum moral clarity. We know who to punish. We just don't really know why. When morality becomes arbitrary, people don't become free. They become anxious. Because if rules are unclear, then anyone can be guilty at any time. And that's why people walk on eggshells. It's why conversation feels tense. It's why truth collapses. It's why institutions feel hostile rather than protective. When truth disappears, safety becomes impossible. We can't build a stable society on permanent uncertainty. And history is remarkably consistent on this point. When moral authority is grounded only in human institutions, it becomes selective, it becomes ideological, and eventually it becomes coercive, not because people are uniquely evil, but because power without truth always justifies itself, and then the state becomes the highest moral voice. And when that happens, disagreement is no longer intellectual, it is moral rebellion. The question facing the West is not whether or not we have a moral framework. We already do, it already does. The question is whether that framework will be discovered or invented, constrained or arbitrary, truth-orientated or power-orientated. Every civilization eventually answers these questions, some consciously and some by consequence. Now, for most of human history, people understood something that we have forgotten, that morality requires submission before it can produce freedom, that authority must be restrained by something higher than itself, and without a shared account of truth, justice dissolves into force. Now, the West once knew this, but it has not replaced it with something better. So if you feel like something is wrong right now, you're not crazy. If you feel like moral language is being used against you rather than for you, you're not imagining it. And if you sense that our problems are deeper than policy or party, then you're finally asking the right questions. We're having the real conversations, because before we can fix politics, we have to recover the foundations that we quietly abandoned. And that conversation is far older and far more serious than most people are willing to admit. But if all of this is true, if our society is fragmenting because it no longer agrees on what is good, what is true, what is binding, then there is an uncomfortable conclusion that we can't avoid. We're not going to vote our way out of this, not quickly and not cleanly. Because the problem isn't simply who holds the power. It is that we no longer agree on what power is for. Modern societies like to tell a comforting story, and it's that individuals are merely products of their environment, that culture shapes people, that systems determine outcomes, and there's some truth in that, but it's not the whole truth. Because history tells us something far more demanding, that society is actually downstream of the individual, and always has been, really. See, laws don't appear out of thin air, institutions don't act on their own, cultures don't drift accidentally. They are built, slowly, by the values that people live by when no one is watching. And that means something both sobering and empowering. The collapse didn't start out there, and the recovery won't either. On sex, on immigration and identity and freedom and responsibility, on all these things. Some people say things are evil, some people say things are progressive, some people say things are compassionate, others say things are destructive. But here's the uncomfortable question that no one wants to ask. What gives one opinion any more authority than another? Because if morality is nothing more than human preference, then every moral claim is equally grounded in nothing. Churchill's convictions and Hitler's convictions become morally indistinguishable, differing only by popularity and power. The moment truth is reduced to consensus, force actually becomes the final argument. That's not a bug in the system, that is the system. And this is where the conversation turns from society to me and you, because the same problem exists at a personal level. Why do you believe what you believe? Why do you value what you value? Why do you feel certain things are wrong even when it costs you to say so? Do your convictions come from convenience, from culture, from instinct, from fear of exclusion, or do they come from something higher than you? Because if your moral framework originates in you, then it has no more authority than the framework of the person who disagrees with you. And if that's the case, then arguments are pointless, persuasion is impossible, and power will always decide. But if morality is real, if truth exists beyond human agreement, then something remarkable becomes possible again. Responsibility, accountability, courage, the ability to say this is true even if it costs me, this is wrong even if it's popular, this is worth preserving even if it's unfashionable. Civilizations don't renew themselves through outrage. They renew themselves when enough individuals decide to live as though truth is real, binding, and worth obeying. When people stop outsourcing conscience to institutions, when they recover the courage to judge themselves before judging others, when they anchor their lives to something that doesn't shift with the headlines. Not in Parliament, not online, and not with slogans. It starts when you and I take responsibility for the frameworks that we are living by, and ask whether it is sturdy enough to sustain a life, a family, and a future. Because until we rediscover a framework that is beyond ourselves, every society we build will eventually collapse under the weight of its own opinions. The question is not whether the West will rediscover that framework. The question is whether you will. And that's what I want to do. It's what I want to live my life by, to examine every claim, not just that someone else makes, but in fact that I make. And to ask the questions, why do you think that? Where did that come from? Because here's my thesis. If it originated with me, then it's worthless. If it originated with someone else, then it's worthless. If it originated from an institution with an aim to manipulate me, then it is worthless. In order for my opinion of societal governance, or in fact anyone else's, to have any significant moral weight, it has to have originated outside of the society it intends to govern. Otherwise, it is influenced by that society. Now you might say, well, what's wrong with that? Surely we want society to be able to test ideas, to find the best ones, agreeing by consensus on what is morally right or morally wrong. Sounds good. Well, that's the current system. And look around, does it look like it's working? Now think about this, and you'll have to use your imagination just for a second, but please just bear with me. If it were known that this planet of ours had been designed by a highly intelligent race of aliens whose ability and understanding and power far exceeded our own. As I say, you'll have to use your imagination with me just for a second. But this race of super aliens designed the world. They designed us. They created our minds. They programmed them to work. They created our desires, our emotions. They foresaw our relationships and interactions. And they handed us an operating manual and told us that if we lived by the operating manual, that we would be operating in a manner that was optimum for our design, that our societies would flourish because we'd all be operating in line with our design parameters. Now, in this case, I put it to you that we should do exactly that. Now, assuming that we can ensure no malintent, it would be rather foolish for us really to assume that we could operate in a way that was better than the designer. Our society flourishes because of a common foundational understanding of the world and how it operates. Now, some might not strictly believe that the aliens ever existed, but nevertheless they all agreed upon the operating principles because they work well. They bind us together and they steer us in our society. They offer a way for everyone to know what is right and what is wrong without the possibility that it's just one person's opinion over another. Now, let's pause for a second and go one level deeper. For the sake of argument, perhaps it isn't necessarily that the specific principles within the operating manual cause societal flourishing. Perhaps it is simply that the inherited principles create a consensus that transcends our own authority. Divulged principles themselves remove the opportunity for fault lines to form. In any given situation, rather than, here's my opinion on how to do things and this is my view on the matter, and the winner and therefore determiner of societal direction is determined not by the better idea, but by the party who can garner more support through power, money, and influence. No. Instead, we have agreed as a society to operate in accordance with the operating manual. You might not agree with it. You might think you can discover a better way, but at least 50% of the population will disagree with you, and they will be plotting an equally unfounded route in the opposite direction. On we go with the picture. Over time, as generations passed, some would stray from the operating manual, no longer believing its stories and objecting to its instruction. Perhaps through discovery, come within spitting distance of being able to prove that the existence of the world itself didn't actually require the race of highly intelligent beings to begin with. Therefore, it can be easily and safely abandoned. And we are free, therefore, to operate outside of these supposed optimum operating principles. But now see, we have lost far more than optimum operating principles. We have lost a commonly agreed upon framework. What is right? What is wrong? Nobody really knows. We've thrown the operating manual aside and now we decide. Except we don't agree. And so society fractures, ideas permeate, relative truth and opinion is the ruling ideology. Society is dead. It is a requirement of any functioning society to have an agreed upon framework of morality and structure, something to refer back to when disagreement breaks out. We won't all agree on every specific idea within the framework. We won't agree on the origin of the framework, but we agree on the integrity of the framework itself. Now, we could try to write our own and I don't imagine it will go well, politicians and lawyers coming together to write a societal framework that defines morality, one that to retain integrity could not be shifted or altered at the whim of human emotion. Doesn't sound like a great idea. No, we have one. We built a society on it. It has provided stability for generations, even for those who deny its author. The only way for us to begin to rebuild is to remember that fact. But it doesn't start in Parliament. It starts with us.